You're listening to the Webcomic Beacon newscast at newscast.webcomicbeacon.com.
Every now and then, someone says something so crazy, it deserves to be talked about. Case in point, on December 26th, the combination of 100,000 Christmas tablets, along with the release of Amazing Spider-Man 700, caused a problem for Comixology servers, resulting of a loss of service for a number of customers. Noting this loss in service, Rich Johnston of Bleeding Cool declared that the popularity of Amazing Spider-Man 700 had broken the internet in half. Literally. In fact, this was just a sort of summation of a statement by the writer of Amazing Spider-Man 700, Dan Slott, who said, "Every now and then, someone says this will break the internet in half, or some other great piece of hyperbole. I can say with a straight face and not an ounce of shame or showmanship that this is the biggest damn thing I have ever done with any character in any story I've ever worked on." So, a loss of functionality at Comixology breaks the internet in half. In a previous life, I used to work as a tech support at a web hosting company. Some of the most unpleasant calls were from AOL users. The reason is when AOL went down, as it did often, the users would call us up and complain, even though our company had nothing to do with AOL. And the thing they would always say was, "The internet's down." One day I overheard a coworker have a moment with one of these callers. He said, "No, ma'am, the global computer network created by the U.S. federal government to survive a full-scale nuclear assault is not down. If you look out your window and don't see at least 3 of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, I can assure you the internet's just fine. No, ma'am, the only thing that is down is that retarded speak and spell of an ISP that you are paying 3 times more than the rest of us rational human beings because you are either too stupid or too scared to use the actual internet." He didn't work much longer after that, but I gotta say, his opinion about AOL has kind of been my opinion about Comixology. It's always seemed like a baby's first webcomic kind of system. See here? You get a comic from the internet. Not that big, scary internet. No, just a small subsection of comics. It has Spider-Man on it. You like Spider-Man, don't you? And guess what? We'll charge you the exact same price a paper comic costs, so you don't feel like it's any different from a comic book at all. Now, don't have anything against the people behind Comixology. I've talked to them. They're good people. I just always saw their efforts as a bridge effort between the dominance of print comics to the dominance of a webcomic. Comixology is, after all, a walled garden, and the wisdom of the internet is walled gardens always fail. Just look at AOL. No, I don't hate Comixology at all. The only thing I really hate in life is when facts ruin a perfectly good theory. For example, the fact that after 5 years, Comixology is the number 10 top-grossing app on iTunes with over 1 million downloads a year, that information I hate, because it makes me sound silly. Up yours, reality. You see, really, there are walled gardens and then there are walled gardens. AOL was a walled garden, but so was iTunes. One failed, and one still has a great deal of dominance. From a functional standpoint, let's face it, the Apple system sucks. Apple cripples its hardware, restricting it to only pre-approved functions, and the iTunes software doesn't qualify as a virus only under the most generous classifications of what is not a virus. Rationally, no one should be using iTunes. It's a horrible system. But yet again, reality decides to be that little bastard and ruin another good theory. iTunes had something that made people overlook how horrible it was as a system. iTunes was cool. Specifically, Apple got the record companies to put their music on iTunes when they were terrified of putting anything online. In 2001, if you wanted to be cool and digitally listen to the new Bootylicious by Destiny, you had to use iTunes. So where does that leave Comixology? Is it AOL or is it iTunes? Well, in one respect, Comixology is a lot like iTunes. It went to the comic publishers who are equally terrified about putting things online because of that evil specter of piracy, and has convinced them that Comixology is a safe system. On the other hand, when it comes to pricing, they're more of an AOL where people are paying 3 times more than any rational human being should be paying for their comics. Currently, the only thing that's keeping Comixology alive is its diversity of offerings. And soon, it will be even more diverse. On December 22nd, Comixology announced on their blog that they would be finally opening up their walled garden to independent creators. They would still have an approval process, but no longer do you have to have a Marvel DC logo on your books. But do independent comics want to join Comixology? One thing to remember, as pointed out by Mark Miller in his blog on January 14th, 2012, you're going through 2 middlemen when you use Comixology. Apple takes its standard 30% of all purchase prices, and then Comixology takes another 50% of the sales, leaving the creator with only 30 cents on every dollar. Compared this to a standard 75 cents on any dollar you get from selling it yourself, and unless Comixology can triple your sales, you're going to be losing money. On the other side of the equation, will DC and Marvel want to stay? How will they react when these independent rabble start outselling their official comic books? Because honestly, all the traffic that Spider-Man 700 had that quote-unquote broke the internet, that would have been considered the worst traffic ever for Penny Arcade. Marvel and DC also have their own apps and have shown a willingness to take their ball and go home whenever things get tough online. Is Comixology the internet for comics? Not by a long shot. Has Rick Johnson viciously abused the word literally, a word that has done him no harm? Figuratively speaking, without a doubt. Was Dan Slott's statement so overflowing with hyperbole it caused the hyperbole meter to explode, taking out 3 city blocks? Yes, and please donate to the Red Cross to support the victims of Dan Slott being allowed to open his mouth. But all this being said, having a gatekeeper for comics is a good idea, and it is going to be the future of comics. Right now, Comixology is playing a high-stakes game. They play their cards right. In the future, when someone calls Comixology the internet, it might not be such a completely insane statement.